You guys already know I don't recommend popping, squeezing, extracting, manipulating a pimple on the face. It's not a good habit and it almost never ends well. It can lead to scarring, infection, hyperpigmentation. It can aggravate your skin tremendously. But another main reason why I don't recommend doing this is that not everything that you think is a pimple is a pimple. Today we're going to be talking about a skin issue that commonly can arise on the face, have you fooled, thinking it's a big old whopping cystic pimple. You try and squeeze it and you are essentially signing up for misery. So an epidermoid cyst is a cyst of the pilosebaceous unit, basically your pore. Many people refer to an epidermoid cyst as a sebaceous cyst. This is technically a misnomer as the sebaceous gland is not involved. If you were to take a biopsy of this bad boy under the microscope, you're going to see essentially a sac filled with dead skin cells and maybe some oily debris. The sac is lined with epidermis. It thinks it is the outside, but it's on the inside. And it creates this cyst that fills up with that keratin material, which normally, if it were where it's supposed to be, would be getting exfoliated off into the atmosphere or with your cleansing and bathing habits or your exfoliants, but it has nowhere to exfoliate, so it just builds up there in that sac and you get this enlarged, well, cyst. These most commonly arise on the trunk, like the chest, the back, but truthfully they can happen pretty much anywhere. They also are really common on the face, and like I said, they can fool you. You might think you've got a big acne cyst, you want to squeeze it, and whew. Speaking of squeezing, one characteristic feature of an epidermoid cyst is that it's got this central punctum, a little pore that's dilated open, and if you squeeze it, this keratin material that's kind of cheesy is going to extrude out. It has a bit of a funky odor to it, kind of like if you've ever worn a hat for a long time, you get sweaty. If you ever take the hat off and give it a whiff, it's the smell of the contents of those cysts. It's basically just a collection of keratin. Epidermoid cysts happen typically in young to middle-aged adults. They are a lot more common in men, 2 times more likely to occur in a man than a woman, but anyone can get them. You also can develop multiple of them. As a matter of fact, there are certain hereditary conditions characterized by multiple epidermoid cysts. One such condition is called basal cell nevus syndrome, a condition that makes people make a lot of basal cell skin cancers and these other types of little tumors, cysts, lumps, and bumps. Sometimes an epidermoid cyst can even arise on the scrotum or the vulva. They're flesh-colored in appearance, usually anywhere from 1 to 3 centimeters in diameter. An epidermoid cyst is typically mobile, something you could wrap your hand around a bit, and if you ever so slightly pinch it up, the central punctum, that pore, can be more obvious. Sometimes that pore is really obvious, like you can see it with the naked eye, but other times you kind of have to move the cyst around a bit to get a good look at it in order to visualize it. Now, for the most part, epidermoid cysts are asymptomatic. They're generally not painful, they don't itch, they don't cause numbness, tingling, nothing of the sort. However, as that cyst fills up with dead keratin material, it can rupture. Or it might rupture because, well, you got tempted and you squeezed it too hard. Once it ruptures, it can become inflamed, red, and then it can be painful because it's essentially leaking the contents out into the skin, and inflammation is going to come on in there and try and correct the issue. Once it ruptures, it's also a lot more vulnerable to becoming secondarily infected with things like staph bacteria, which could lead to an impetigo. A ruptured epidermoid cyst is going to scar down, and then it's going to reform, and you're going to get reaccumulation of that keratin material in there, but it's going to have surrounding scar tissue within the skin. There are a variety of other lumps and bumps that can look like an epidermoid cyst but are different. For example, a condition people often want to know, is this that or is it this? It is called a lipoma. I know a lot of you guys actually found me from my lipoma video I did many years ago. The information in that video is still relevant. There's really nothing to update in that video, so check it out if you think you might be dealing with lipomas. They are fatty tumors that can at first glance look a bit like an epidermoid cyst. They're firm, mobile, rubbery nodules, so they have a little bit of a different texture to them. Importantly, there is no central pore, no central punctum. You're not going to get any material out of a lipoma, and if you squeezed it and squeezed it and squeezed it, it's not going to rupture. That being said, don't squeeze anything. A lipoma is a benign, meaning non-cancerous tumor of the fat cells, is really well contained. Lipomas don't rupture and cause scarring in the surrounding tissue. Then you have something called a pilar cyst, which often happens on the scalp but can happen elsewhere on the head and neck. A pilar cyst, otherwise called a tricholemmal cyst, is a cyst of the hair follicle. There's no central punctum and they're pretty hard. Then you have an acne pseudocyst. Acne pseudocyst does not typically have a punctum. With an acne pseudocyst, you're going to have other findings of acne. The individual is going to have blackheads, whiteheads, inflamed bumps, pimples. You're not going to have an acne pseudocyst in isolation with no other acne lesions. These are just some of the more common things that can look like an epidermoid cyst, but there are actually a whole host of other lumps and bumps that might fool you into thinking, oh, this is acne, let's squeeze it and see what happens. You know what they say, F around and find out. Here is why you definitely do not want to squeeze these bad boys. So in order to get rid of them, the most effective and arguably the only treatment is to have them cut out, excised. And as a dermatologist, let me tell you, they're actually pretty gratifying to remove because they have that sac, that lining, and that's really what you want to get out. In order to effectively treat them, not only do you excise them, but you want to make sure you get the entirety of that sac. If you don't get the sac, well, then the epidermoid cyst is just going to recur. And what a pain that is, to have surgery and then only have the cyst come back when it was supposed to cure it. So in order to effectively treat them, you have to remove the sac. But here's the thing, if an epidermoid cyst ruptures, either from manipulation or it's just gotten too full with keratin debris and it's ruptured, well, that scar tissue makes it much more difficult to efficiently and effectively remove the entire cyst wall lining, and therefore it is more common for it to then recur, which is a pain for you. Not to mention, because it has that surrounding scar tissue and can be more extensive, you are going to likely be left with a much larger scar. When we're talking about our face, you don't want that. So don't squeeze or manipulate. Ideally, if you have something like this, you would have it seen by a dermatologist ASAP and have it removed. One and done. Unfortunately, with limited access to dermatologic care in many areas of the country, of the world, this isn't always a possibility. Now, primary care doctors, once upon a time, did remove these. Some probably still do, but your doctor might actually need to refer you to a dermatologist. In some cases, an epidermoid cyst might spontaneously resolve and go away with no treatment, but importantly, squeezing or manipulating it does not make it go away. It only makes it all the more stubborn and persistent and causes a lot more problems for you, not only in terms of the surrounding scarring, but the risks of infection, hyperpigmentation, and again, it's something that is a more extensive problem for you. Maybe one day they'll come up with a therapy where we could just take a pill and it would melt the cysts away, but I don't see that coming down the pipeline anytime soon, and surgery is very effective and it does get rid of the cyst so that it doesn't come back, provided these cyst wall contents are removed. What makes epidermoid cysts really tempting for people, especially to squeeze, is the fact that you can get some of that keratin expressing material out. You can express some material, but trust me when I say this, that's not helpful for you to do because it will continue to reaccumulate, and the pressure on the cyst can again lead to rupture. You're not, you know, shrinking it down by squeezing it. All right, guys, that's what I wanted to talk about with regards to epidermoid cyst. I hope this video was helpful to you. On the end slate, I'm going to put my recent video all about bumps on the face. Check that one out next so you don't mistake bumps on the face for acne when they are something totally different. But if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.